On this day, the young man and woman vowed to each other to always be together in marriage. A duke named Dionel Miramonte remained calm in this situation very well, but in reality, he was angry at the girl who was supposed to become his wife by agreement. The heroine, who grew up in the poor slums of the city, had no other choice if she wanted money. That's why Ciel Roland smiled happily in front of the priest, pretending that everything was fine. Although the boy and girl sealed the deal with a hot kiss, none of it was real. A few months before, the lady had been living quietly in a backstreet alley in the town of Ardell. She often visited gambling establishments, as she was an amazing master of deception and fraud. Many people didn't even suspect that such a young miss could easily beat them. But Roland could hardly contain her smile at how rich she had become once again. But suddenly, a nightly raid burst into the quiet and inconspicuous room. The girl fearfully collected all the money, which she did not want to lose even under the threat of being taken into custody. She was so skilled in this matter that the knight did not notice the young lady's tricks. Then Ciel, with tears in her eyes, pretended that she had nothing to do with the recent game. The girl lied that she was just looking for her brother, which is why she went into such a dirty place. Roland diligently squeezed pity out of the knight in the hope that he would let her go. As a result, the heroine's charm and lies worked, and the guy took pity on her. Roland quickly ran away, not wanting to be caught among the other scammers. She was only 24 years old, but the girl learned to survive in poor areas. She loved money so much that she would do anything just to get it. So Ciel was completely satisfied with this god-forsaken city on the very outskirts of the empire. But the lady had no idea that she had been closely watched for some time. This was the same grumpy duke with whom Miss would meet a little later. In the small house, the heroine's 14-year-old brother, named Mel, was already waiting for her. He was sure that his sister was a brilliant swindler, but he was still worried. To help her earn money, the boy even taught himself to shuffle cards. And Roland didn't know how to tell her relative that he was doing surprisingly badly. She only stepped onto this dirty path of gambling to raise her brother. And even though they were not related by blood, for the two orphans, there was no one closer to each other. So the girl could not allow the young man to follow her path instead of knighthood. But Mel didn't understand how he could become a knight if he was born among ordinary people. Then the heroine quite seriously suggested that her relative buy the necessary status. She was determined to create better living conditions for her beloved younger brother. The boy was delighted with this offer because he wanted to follow his dream of becoming a knight. That's why the thief went to the head of her guild with such a difficult financial question. Hector was immediately skeptical about the girl's request, as there were few expensive cases. However, he was able to tell that Duke Dionel Miramonte himself was currently visiting the city. The man was worried about the reputation of the man who was rumored to have killed his brother. But Roland was not interested in this gossip, which had nothing to do with her business. She could easily lure noble gentlemen into gambling in the gambling house. Ciel had long since learned to pretend to be a silly aristocrat, which attracted attention. No matter how much the commoner's manners suffered, her knowledge was enough to deceive high-ranking officials. So Roland bravely set out on this difficult mission that required mastery of lies. The Duke looked even more handsome up close than in his portraits in printed newspapers. But the fierce coldness in the guy's eyes made it clear that it was better not to mess with him. However, the lady had no choice but to attract the attention of this rich gentleman. But Dionel suspected something about the lady at first glance, so he approached her. Ciel began to noticeably become nervous, as she was sure that she did not arouse suspicion. Suddenly, another skilled and beautiful swindler named Valoni came to her aid. The heroine had been competing with this lady for a long time, so she was not very happy about her appearance. But the golden-haired girl quickly spoke to the Duke, causing him to take a step back. Roland did not remain in debt, and hinted that it was her aunt in front of her, and not her peer. It was all because the lady hated it when someone tried to take away her monetary goal. Despite the guy's frightening face, the girl asked him to teach her how to play poker. In the end, there were only scammers sitting around, so Dionel was bound to lose. Valoni gently led to the fact that the game had to start with a high-stakes stake, and Ciel insisted on trying, although according to legend, she didn't know how to play at all. According to the girl's plan, her old acquaintances were to gradually weaken the Duke's attention. Among them, there was only one newcomer who would take the loss just to appease Miramonte. To begin with, the heroine allowed the rich aristocrat to win in order to cheer him up. Everyone around immediately began to compliment the man who played so well. But then Dionel announced with irritation that he no longer planned to play poker. What irritated the guy most was that the lady periodically tapped her heel under the table. The scammers looked at each other in horror, because this gesture was their main symbol in the game. Ciel watched in confusion as the Duke sent her friends away one by one. At the same time, the guy remained just as imperturbably calm, as if nothing had happened. But the heroine was shaking with anger, as she realized that the aristocrat was simply playing with her. With a cheeky smile, Miramonte offered the young girl just one private gaming lesson, and Ciel needed money for her brother so badly that she didn't dare refuse. But the girl is not used to sticking to one strategy for a long time, so she smiled and suggested playing another, but no less exciting game. This game turned out to be the well-known chess, in which Miss also knew how to cheat. Roland constantly felt the Duke's appraising gaze on her, which made her feel uneasy. Miss's instinct told her that he had seen her somewhere before, but she couldn't figure out where exactly. But after a few minutes, the heroine realized that the guy had been watching her while she was cheating. Dionel did not deny this, since he did not like to lie, even to those who tried to deceive him personally. Ciel couldn't be changed, so she lied that she hadn't tried to cheat at all today. Miramonte considered this attitude to be incredibly impudent, but remained silent in response. Instead, the guy offered the lady to bet something on this game, because he would give her everything she wanted. Roland became wary when she heard that she would have to work for the master for several years. But the lady was so self-confident that she could barely contain a sly smile at her easy victory. The girl had been studying all the strategies of gambling since childhood, so the last time she lost was a long time ago. But the game still ended in the heroine's complete defeat, which she could not believe. What struck the lady most was the Duke's confession that he was playing chess for the first time in his life. In fact, the strategic directions of this game were reminiscent of the war in which Dionel was a master. Only now did Miss realize that she had made a mistake when she sat down to play with such a military man. The guy didn't beat around the bush and honestly admitted that he needed a marriage contract from Ciel. Dionel didn't want to get married for real, so he looked for a fictitious and temporary wife. But Roland did not understand why. Among so many aristocrats, a commoner was chosen. The girl guessed that everything was not so simple, and Miramonte needed a specific wife, and the gentleman confirmed that he needed a special skill from the girl who would cheat in his presence. The Duke chose for himself an extremely difficult object of deception in the form of the attentive emperor of this country. Roland realized that she was in on something big, but she needed the money too much to refuse. A few days before this moment, the guy became interested in the girl who won money. Even in this remote town, he was haunted by pretentious tasks from the cheerful emperor. The ruler sent his subordinate to Ardil because there were many beauties there. Javier hoped that Dionel would finally be able to find his beloved, even if it was in such a place. But the Duke's plan was simply to pretend that he was trying to find someone. But the emperor forbade the assistant to return without some beautiful lady by his side. Dionel was truly shocked by this news, as he had never been given such conditions before. The gentleman hoped that he would be able to present this trip as an ordinary and small adventure. But the emperor made his own adjustments, so Miramonte had no choice but to obey his elder. Dionel wasn't very happy about the assignment that had happened, but he always carried out any orders perfectly. It was at that moment that the young aristocrat came up with the idea of collaborating with the swindler. But now he had to come to an agreement with Ciel, who did not want to take part in this. Miss understood that she would not be able to refuse after losing to such an impudent and self-confident guy. Therefore, the scammer intended to get the greatest benefit for herself from such a long-term deal. The Duke was indignant when the lady spoke about payment, because she had just lost to him in a game of chess. But the girl began to set a price for herself for risking her face in this matter. Ciel insisted that she would be known throughout the empire for several years, and after that, she would not be able to marry. But Miramonte, like a decrepit and stingy old man, lowered the amount that the thief had legally demanded for herself. Roland easily convinced the guy that he couldn't find anyone better than her in the matter of fraud. So the Duke had no choice but to agree to the cunning lady's demands. Only when the heroine had secured favorable conditions for herself did she shake Dionel's hand to seal the agreement. But the lady did not stop there, as she began to draw up a written agreement. The Duke sighed more and more heavily in response, as he expected to finish this matter as quickly as possible. Now the swindler was bargaining for the prize, arguing that she would be deceiving the emperor himself. Although Ciel had already received the promise of the desired amount, she could not help but bargain further. Miramonte had already regretted several times that he had gotten involved with such an enterprising girl. He angrily reminded her that the sword of the empire was now sitting in front of the girl, protecting her better than anyone else. So Miss had to live in a place that was much safer than any other place in the country. But the heroine stubbornly declared that she was not going to believe words without evidence. It was perfectly normal for Ciel to argue, since they were currently in the middle of discussing the treaty. The fact that the chosen swindler turned out to be quite smart pleasantly surprised the Duke, who was looking for a wife. Therefore, he stopped arguing with the girl for a while, since she would have defended her rights to the last anyway. So the Duke and the commoner were finally able to enter into a contract that satisfied both parties. Roland was surprised to notice that Miramonte's signature was much longer than her simple and short one. But the majestic aristocrat himself did not see a problem with this at all, as he considered it beautiful. The swindler grumbled as Dionel demanded that she come to him. The Duke hated it when people expressed disapproval to him, as he was used to always being the main one in life. The heroine was immediately embarrassed by such closeness with a man she saw for the first time in her life. But, hearing the loud sound of the fall, the lady herself jumped onto the Duke's lap out of fear. Dionel grumbled that the intrusion of the eavesdropping scammers was a gross violation of privacy. The heroine's confused acquaintances couldn't even say anything in their own defense, since they were truly guilty. And Ciel already realized that, due to Miramonte's meanness, she asked for too little money for her work. However, rumors have already begun to circulate about the relationship between Dionel and the mysterious woman. The lady could ask the Duke for anything she wanted, but the girl was no longer happy about it, all because the guy was not going to let go of the miss who agreed to the contract, while other scammers were busy preparing to win the heart of a rich man. But Miramonte was not at all concerned about the rumors that Ciel laughingly told him. Instead, he placed a thick book in front of the thief, which frightened the heroine. Roland was not ready to learn the entire history of her fictitious husband's family, even for the sake of business. But because of her new status with the name Marlene Sinclair, the lady had to know this. So the girl sighed sadly, realizing that she had really gotten the deal cheaply. On top of everything else, Ciel also prepared her fake backstory with a family tree. She wrote all these circumstances down on paper so that Dionel could learn them. The guy didn't say a word to the lady, despite the amount of material he needed to memorize. And Roland proudly announced that she definitely could not have made a mistake in history. But the lady didn't expect that the Duke would say, literally a few minutes later, that he had learned everything. She wished she could remember his story with the same ease, but she didn't have that kind of memory. This angered the girl so much that she was not ready to take lessons from the Duke. But the lady was destined to become the ideal bride with an aristocratic pedigree. The fraudster tried her best to avoid lessons, but she was not given the opportunity. With the Duke's permission, Madame Keller intended to torment the miss until she was satisfied. This made Roland sadder and sadder every day, because he had no free time. The formidable teacher raised her voice with an air of importance, humiliating the manners of her charge. Ciel was ready to curse the day she lost to Dionel and agreed to his terms. The girl was frightened when learning manners by the fact that there were different bows for the emperor and empress. But Keller, over many years of living among aristocrats, has become accustomed to all the nuances. So Roland, no matter how much she wanted to go home, had to obediently remember everything. The only thing that motivated the girl was her brother, who needed money. Thus passed several more difficult days under the supervision of a strict and wise teacher. Since it was impossible to train Ciel forever, she was given the opportunity to rest. At first, the heroine again forgot about her manners, but quickly corrected herself at the sight of Madame's gaze. Roland remembered that Valoni was supposed to come to her today, so she hurried to her. The Duke admitted that he only allowed the meeting because she too was a fraud. And the problem was that this madam was quite difficult to deceive because of her experience. However, Ciel, without batting an eye, began to convince her friend of Miramonte's love. The fair-haired lady was horrified that anyone could fall in love with a thief like Roland. But this matter did not concern Valoni, so she quickly calmed down and began to behave normally. In fact, it was not without reason that the heroine called her friend before leaving for the Empire. She carefully handed the swindler the key to the safe that was in the Thieves' Guild. The girl told a friend she trusted about a bag of money in a secret panel. Miss wanted more than anything for Valoni to help her brother become a knight. The blonde swindler had known Mel since childhood, so she couldn't refuse. She was a little sad that such a good competitor was leaving the game for a while. And Roland, with fury in her voice, asked the thief not to reveal her true identity to anyone. Valoni herself understood perfectly well how dangerous the matter was that Ciel had gotten herself involved in, so she promised that she wouldn't let the working girl worry about her brother. The heroine even felt that her friend was showing excessive concern for her case. This triggered a spirit of contradiction within the woman, so she could not remain silent. As a result, the two acquaintances began to fight loudly, which could be heard throughout the entire estate. The girls cursed and cursed each other until Valoni left. So the heroine was surprised to realize that she felt a little better after meeting her friend. Despite all the poverty of her hometown, the lady was sad to leave familiar places. But then the lady's attention was drawn to beautiful flowers that she had never seen before. The first thing the inveterate thief thought about was how much the plant could be sold for. However, before she could do anything, she heard an unfamiliar voice behind her. This voice made the girl frown, as it asked her not to touch the rare flower. And it belonged to the Duke's bodyguard, named Fernando, who was assigned to Ciel. The guy himself admitted with a smile that he does nothing to protect the skilled Dionel. Miss guessed that this man was working only to create the illusion of security, but her sixth sense told the heroine that the knight had come to her for a reason. There were so few people in the mansion that the lady guessed that the guy was a spy for the Duke. This infuriated the girl, who had expected more trust from Miramonte. Despite her status as a fraud, the heroine always did her job conscientiously, and even when the lady was in really bad shape, she did not dare to extort money by physical force. So Ciel had her own pride, which Dionel considered a trivial matter. Roland could not miss the opportunity to take revenge on the impudent and arrogant Duke. Therefore, she began to do everything in her power to weaken the attention of the guy who was supposed to be watching her. The first thing the girl did was lie, saying she was from the same place as him just to gain his trust. From Fernando's joyful reaction, the lady immediately realized that she had started to manipulate correctly. During her life in the slums, the heroine learned to masterfully please everyone around her, so the bodyguard himself didn't notice how he found himself closer to the miss than he could have allowed himself to be. He involuntarily blushed to the very tips of his ears, which the cunning swindler immediately noticed. Meanwhile, the heroine realized that the person in front of her was an ordinary village simpleton. The more the lady looked at him, the more she realized that the knight would be easy prey for Valoni. This is because Fernando was like a sweet and loyal puppy who wanted to help. So Miss allowed herself to cry a little, lying that she wanted to be alone. And the knight was not ready to upset such a beautiful girl that he liked. Therefore, he allowed the lady to walk alone, which she had been manipulating from the very beginning. Ciel had no desire to be in the company of a spy who would report on her actions. She was deeply outraged by the actions of the Duke, who assigned an overseer to her. So the girl played with Dionel a little and made him look for her himself. Seeing the irritated guy, the lady smiled happily and refused to go down. Miramonte patiently reminded him that he would not tolerate disobedience from his fictitious wife. Only Roland reported that obedience could only be achieved through trust. Dionel had already guessed why the thief had made such a scene, so he sighed. And Miss continued to heighten the atmosphere with words about vile betrayal and deception. But the Duke did not consider himself at all guilty of wanting to ensure safety. So the guy was very angry at the girl's manipulations, trying to accuse him of something. Eventually, the Duke admitted that he had indeed set Fernando up to spy, and the Miss contemptuously said that she hated such meanness, although she herself was a thief. As much as Dionel was sure the lady needed safety, she didn't listen. Roland sincerely could not understand why it should be dangerous for her to be around the Duke. Even the guy's statements about numerous enemies could not calm the offended girl. Ciel puffed out her cheeks even more, her whole appearance expressing her dissatisfaction with the situation. Only when Dionel promised not to collect reports from the knight did the lady immediately calm down. But it turned out that Miss had climbed too high, so she couldn't get down on her own. This circumstance terrified the heroine, who believed that everything would be under control. With a sigh, Miramonte promised to catch the lady who was afraid to go down. But the girl was very worried about her body, because she could not allow it to be damaged. However, she grabbed the branch carelessly, which caused Miss to lose her balance. That's why Ciel flew down with all her might, without having time to group herself at all. She saw the tense body of the guy who was trying to catch her, but was not ready for it. Eventually, they both fell to the ground, feeling all the pain of such a fall from the height of a tree. Roland immediately groaned in pain, as she was sensitive even to small cuts. But a second later, the girl jumped away from Miramonte as she realized their closeness. The guy was clearly in worse shape, but he bravely endured everything that happened to him. Seeing the Duke's face a few centimeters away, the lady again noticed how handsome he was. It was clear from Dionel's expression how unhappy he was with the girl's behavior. So, just in case, she moved away from the guy as far as possible to avoid being rude. Ciel, with feigned joy, praised the Duke's skills for being able to catch her so easily. She even suggested that they join the circus together, which the guy did not approve of at all. Instead, he reminded her that it wouldn't hurt for Miss to get some more manners lessons. So, with a menacing look, the Duke sent the girl to Madame Keller while she was free. The heroine stared in horror at Dionel for treating her so cruelly as punishment. The lady tried to beg forgiveness from Miramonte, but he remained firm in his opinion. So, the rest of the time, Miss was busy preparing for her status as an aristocrat. She didn't know that Fernando suffered no less for letting her go. And now, there was only one day left before leaving for the Empire, and Ciel came up with a plan. She purposefully followed the Duke, just so he would listen to her proposal. The girl, through arguments and curses, sought permission to visit her home one last time. What angered Miramonte was that Marlene Sinclair didn't have a back-alley brother at all. The guy sincerely didn't understand why the lady needed to see her brother in person if he was being looked after. But Roland considered their meeting necessary because it was unclear when they would meet again now. Something clicked in the gentleman's head when he heard the girl's words about her younger and precious brother. A memory of his older brother, who adored Dionel so much, immediately came to mind. But Ciel had already given up hope in her attempts to beg at least some kind of walk from the formidable and stern Duke. Suddenly, Miramonte asked if the lady really loved her brother so much. Miss immediately confirmed that she had indeed been attached to the younger one since childhood. After the girl's loud words, it was as if a cold breeze blew between them. The swindler was finally convinced that her arguments would have no effect on the Duke. Unexpectedly, Dionel took pity and allowed the thief to meet her brother. Roland was overjoyed and thanked the guy for not holding her back. But the Duke inexorably appointed Fernando to follow the girl this time too. He turned around and showed with his whole appearance that their conversation was over. Although the conditions were not entirely pleasing to the lady, she was so eager to see her brother that she did not become upset. So, after just a few hours, the heroine and the knight reached home. It turned out to be a small structure, sadly hidden between larger houses. The miss insistently asked the assistant to wait for her outside so as not to worry her brother. She forced him to do so with an order from the future Duchess, which the guy could not argue with. So Fernando, like a faithful and obedient puppy, remained outside anxiously, and the girl happily threw off her cloak to show herself to Mel in all her glory. The little brother had no idea that his sister would visit him so unexpectedly, so he took a nap during the day. But at the sight of the eldest, he immediately rushed into her arms, as he had already missed her. He shared that Valoni had promised to make a night out of him the last time she visited. The boy was delighted with the opportunities that opened up for him in his education. The thief even made sure that the child had the appropriate status, and Ciel affectionately praised her brother for agreeing to follow his dream. Here she noticed that the younger one had grown quite a lot of hair lately. Mel himself didn't pay attention to this nuance, since he was only worried about his studies. Then the heroine took the initiative into her own hands and reached for the hairdressing scissors. The lady insisted that her brother look neat at the Imperial Academy. Besides, the girl enjoyed immersing herself in a peaceful household activity. She was sad to disappoint her brother by leaving Ardell for a while for work. No matter how much Miss consoled Mel with money, for her it no longer carried such value. Therefore, Ciel only pretended to want to be separated from her brother for the sake of his studies and her work. She earnestly asked the younger one not to allow himself to be bullied. But the boy was sure that he would never get lost, because he had learned a lot on the streets. The girl laughed in response, because there was a lot of truth in her brother's confident words. But he was still worried about his sister going to the very heart of the Empire. The heroine herself was not happy that she was the one who got such a difficult job. Mel asked sadly whether it was for his happy future that Miss had tried so hard. As soon as Roland noticed the sadness in her brother's voice, she sharply encouraged him with a gesture. The future Duchess believed that she was earning a better life for both of them. Mel couldn't help but worry about his sister, from whom he was forced to be separated for a long time, and she began to give him instructions, just so that everything would be okay with the younger one. In response, the boy, with the same enthusiasm, advised the older woman not to let herself be offended. Then the heroine heard a plaintive knock on the door and realized that it was time for her to go. She put a happy smile on her face, just so that her brother wouldn't worry about her. But Mel didn't try to pretend that he was happy about being separated from his beloved sister. However, Ciel was truly calm about the boy who would go to the academy, so the lady had to deal with her problems in the form of a whining knight. The guy was worried that they were very late getting back, although this didn't bother Miss. Fernando was already imagining how cruel the punishment the Duke would choose for him. Even before leaving, Dionel promised to beat up his assistant if he did not comply with his demands. It turned out that the knight was not the only one to suffer because of Mr. Miramonte's irritation. Miss felt for herself how evil and cruel the young aristocrat could be. But in fact, the Duke did not at all mean his actions as revenge for yesterday. The whole thing was that the guy found out about the tricks of the lady who stole a lot of things. He was surprised at how easily the girl took the smallest but most expensive pieces of jewelry. Seal ran away in shock, but noticed that for the first time, someone had figured her out. On the way, the girl met Fernando, who was frightened by her disheveled appearance. The knight immediately decided that the young lady was being punished because of her lateness yesterday, so he fell to the floor, wondering what would be done to him if Miss was not very good. In fact, Ciel was so worried because she saved one jewel. This was the thing the heroine most wanted to steal, so she couldn't help but rejoice. But then the Duke approached her and demandingly offered her his hand, which surprised the girl. The thought occurred to the thief that noble ladies were always helped into the carriage. The only thing was that Dionel found out about another stolen treasure, so he kindly asked the lady to bend over, since they were in front of witnesses. So, in a charming voice, Miramonte declared that Ciel looked better with her hair down. The maids blushed in embarrassment at the sight of such closeness between the young aristocrats. Roland tried her best to keep a straight face, although she was upset that the Duke had taken away the jewelry. But no matter how hard the lady tried to return what did not belong to her, there was no result. Therefore, Miss had to come to terms with her first defeat in her life, due to the lack of thefts. As soon as they got into the carriage and were left alone, Roland expressed all her indignation. The swindler was offended that the gentleman did not allow her to take even one hairpin. The girl believed that with all his wealth, Dionel could turn a blind eye to her thefts. This made the guy sigh heavily, as he was tired of such quarrels since the morning. As soon as he bent down, Miramonte discovered another stolen jewel. Her lady carefully hid it in her shoe, so the thing did not fall out when the miss shook her head upside down. Ciel only smiled pitifully in response, as she could tell from the atmosphere that she had gone too far. The guy admitted that in his military life, he had more difficult tasks than searching for treasure. The swindler could only politely clap her hands. Because the Duke had managed to find everything, she still considered Dionel a real greedy and miserly person who didn't allow anything. But all the guy's negative qualities did not outweigh the fact that he was incredibly handsome. The lady had heard many legends about the Duke, who was considered a genius of war because of his victories. But Roland couldn't imagine how one could be so beautiful and cruel at the same time. Here, Miramonte looked with displeasure at the girl who was looking at him closely. In response, the heroine honestly admitted that she considered the guy truly handsome. Dionel immediately guessed that the lady was simply bored riding in the carriage with him. Then he told the girl that there were several games played together under the table. Miss immediately became inspired and invited Miramonte to play with her a little. She even came up with a funny bet in which the guy had to return the jewelry to her. Dionel thought for a moment as he came up with a decent bet. Roland didn't expect that the gentleman would ask her to bet her honesty on losing. The girl immediately began to lie, saying that she wasn't lying at all in front of the guy with whom she had made an agreement. But the Duke was sure of the opposite, so the lady had no choice but to agree to the conditions. Ciel suggested this game also because the deck of poker cards was completely new, and as a skilled swindler, the heroine couldn't help but use her skills in the game. To begin with, she arranged the poker cards in a standard order, choosing the best ones for herself. The lady had no doubt that she would shuffle the cards in the way that suited her perfectly, so Miss easily gave the Duke all the low cards so that he could not win. The girl mixed only high suits into her cards, increasing her chances of winning. Roland could barely contain her sly grin, as she was confident of her victory. But Dionel didn't even blink an eye as he managed to win over the skilled swindler. The heroine could not come to terms with such a defeat, which befell her for the second time in her life. The lady refused to believe that the guy had no previous experience in gambling. In response, the Duke explained that he was able to win because he believed in his rival's deception. He was sure that Ciel would not be able to give up her pride as a thief and would resort to trickery. The heroine was surprised at how easily the guy calculated all her thoughts in the game. For the first time in her life, she met a person who understood her so well. So the lady invited Dionel to join her in cheating everyone in the world at cards. Miss wasn't at all upset by the refusal, because there were beautiful views outside the window. The girl recognized them as the city that was depicted on one of the poker-playing cards. Ciel enthusiastically asked the Duke for permission to take a look at this place. However, after a few minutes, the lady forgot about her desire, as she saw something better. It turned out to be the castle of Miramonte, which, according to the Duke, was not yet the largest. The lady immediately remembered that she was now Marlene Sinclair, and she had to live up to it. Diurnal hoped that the swindler would not forget important lessons and disgrace him. He tenderly embraced the girl with whom he had entered into a fictitious marriage under an agreement. As Miramonte expected, all the servants gathered in the hall to greet the masters. Diurnal briefly introduced the lady, sensing that she was nervous due to the unfamiliar surroundings. The butler tactfully did not raise the topic of rumors from Ardell regarding this miss. He only promised to immediately prepare the rooms to please the Duke. The assistant did not know what to expect from Lady Marlene, whom he saw for the first time in his life. For him, the girl seemed like a beautiful angel who had come down from heaven for the sake of marriage. The swindler behaved according to etiquette, so she was frightened when the man violated it. The butler, with tears in his eyes, admitted that his master could have been left alone for the rest of his life. All the servants were grateful to the miss for agreeing to marry the master. But the heroine wasn't even ready to live together with Diurnal, which is what was being discussed. The thief imagined their night together with horror, because in essence, they were strangers to each other. The butler didn't even notice the girl's emotions, as he was too busy with his own affairs. And the lady was faced with urgent preparations for a meeting with the emperor, which she was not happy about. Ciel had hoped that she would be able to rest at least a little upon arrival, but this did not happen, so the girl obediently allowed the maids to change her clothes and wash her properly. The heroine felt ashamed that she was forced to show her body to strangers. However, the lady did her best to behave like an aristocrat who deserved such treatment. Ciel proudly accepted all the compliments from the maids who tried to please her. However, Roland was unable to hide the marks of the beating and lied that she had simply fallen as a child. One of the maids said carelessly that these scars did not look like traces of a fall. The heroine's expression made it clear to her assistant that she had crossed a dangerous line. The maid immediately covered her mouth in fear, as she had no right to comment. She asked the lady for forgiveness, hoping that she would not be punished for this now. But Ciel was glad that she was left alone, so she had no intention of taking revenge on her assistant. The lady completely relaxed and forgot that among aristocrats, they pay attention to beatings, so Miss demanded to be left alone, as she would change her clothes herself from now on. However, the future Duchess's loneliness did not last long, as the servants turned out to be curious. Due to her attempts to dress herself, the lady was so late that the Duke came for her. That's why Ciel suddenly came straight to the guy, only at that moment having completed her preparations. Diurnal briefly complimented the girl, because he was angry about her lateness. Roland immediately reminded him that she was not obligated to save a stranger's time. The Duke only sighed in response, as he understood that it was useless to argue with the thief. But the girl was in no hurry at all, as she knew that the imperial palace was nearby. She looked in surprise at the Duke's outstretched hand, because she had not stolen anything. But this time, the guy just wanted to take the lady by the hand, as decency required. So Ciel was even glad that she hadn't had time to spot any jewelry. Literally, a few minutes later, they had already reached one of the emperor's palaces. Miss cringed inwardly at how overwhelming the building seemed, and the aristocrats, who had been warned about their arrival, were already running to meet the pair. But the Duke didn't even turn his head towards the people who loved gossip. The lady only mentally laughed at the actions of Diurnal, who did not like to communicate. And so, in silence, they reached the doors of the main hall, behind which the emperor sat. Before entering, Miramonte pulled his fictitious wife even closer to him. He wished the girl luck in seducing the ruler, whose trust she had to earn. Javier greeted the guests with a joyful smile, as he had not seen a better duke for a long time. But Diurnal observed all the manners, so he bowed delicately to his majesty. The lady remembered Keller's instructions that she was not allowed to simply look at the emperor. But the ruler himself did not look like a man who demanded respect for his person. Miramonte tried to talk about military matters, but the man was only interested in women. The ruler hoped until the very end that his beloved assistant had found himself a bride. Ciel listened to this man with caution, since she had a poor understanding of what he was like. For some reason, Javier didn't let the lady say a word, as if he didn't notice her at all. So the dialogue with the emperor was entirely maintained by Diurnal alone, and he did a good job. The heroine became increasingly angry because they had completely forgotten about her, even though she was standing right next to them. This was the first time the girl had encountered such a disrespectful attitude towards herself. And the emperor loudly hoped that the lady would be a good and beautiful person. After these words, Roland realized that the ruler was deliberately ignoring her. Javier successfully pretended that the only swordsman standing before him was the best in the empire. Therefore, Miss had to attract the ruler's attention herself in order to introduce herself. And even in such a situation, Villatan humiliated the girl with words that he didn't like. The swindler could barely restrain herself from starting to scream back. She had no idea why Javier acted so arrogantly around her. Only now did Miramonte stand up for the lady he wanted to see as his wife. In response, the emperor fell silent thoughtfully, as something about the guests had made him wary. Dionyl tried not to show that he was nervous, because he was afraid that his lie would be exposed. And suddenly, the ruler started talking about how he never doubted the boy's skills. Even in his youth, the boy easily demonstrated incredible abilities in battles and combat. And as an adult, it was impossible to count how many times Dionyl brought victory. But when it came to the girl, the emperor was not ready to believe his assistant. Miramonte had nothing to say to Javier, because he could not love anyone else. So the ruler was sure that his best assistant was so brazenly lying to his face. The emperor could not calm down because the duke was ruining his reputation. He was irritated that he had to talk about true love at such an age, and the ruler believed that there was no love between the young people because the guy did not protect the girl. So Javier was sure that the duke was simply trying to deceive him, which is why he brought the lady. He did not believe that such a simple daughter of an aristocrat could attract the attention of Miramonte. Dionyl didn't expect his plan to fail so quickly, and for him to do nothing. But the swindler was fixated on the idea that the ruler was disappointed in his assistant. This made the girl understand that the emperor was also an ordinary man, like all of them, which meant to the thief that she could very well deceive him if she tried. So, while the emperor was cursing at the lying Miramonte, the lady took action. She began to cry sadly, pretending to try to contain the emotions that were bursting out. Seeing this, Javier froze in place in complete shock, as he did not expect the lady to cry. And the miss loudly asked how she could live with such a low status and the ruler's contempt. Roland did her best to pretend that she was suffering because her love was not trustworthy. Villatan was completely at a loss when he saw the hysteria of the Duke of Miramonte's fiancée. The ruler even asked the miss for forgiveness for saying unpleasant words, and the heroine said that she wanted to show the emperor a happy face. That's why she smiled. At the same time, Ciel discreetly glanced at Dionyl, demanding that he play along with her. The guy immediately guessed what exactly the swindler, acting out the scene, was demanding. Therefore, in front of the ruler, he tenderly approached the lady, who continued to cry. Dionyl obediently hugged Marlene, trying to calm her with caresses and words. As a result, Javier came to believe that Sinclair truly loved his precious assistant, and the Duke played along with her so well that he even frightened the ruler a little with his gaze. Villatan didn't understand how to smooth over the situation that he himself had accidentally created. So, to begin with, the emperor asked the girl to take a walk in the garden to calm down. The servants immediately took the young aristocrat aside, trying to help her calm down. They circled around the heroine with concern, but she actually wanted to be left alone. In the end, the lady managed to achieve solitude, which made her sigh with relief. Every time the heroine tried to play a prank on someone, she gave in to her emotions too much. As a result, the girl sat with tear-stained eyes on a bench in the garden, trying to calm down. Suddenly, the lady heard an unfamiliar male voice that became interested in her. A handsome, fair-haired guy in expensive clothes suddenly appeared in front of Miss. She stared in surprise at the expensive scarf that the stranger delicately offered. Sinclair was clear that in front of her stood the prince himself, whose name she did not know. The boy strongly resembled his father, and his manners made it clear that he was a majestic aristocrat. At this moment, Dionyl was communicating with the emperor, unaware of the thief's situation. Miramonte tried to calm the ruler's suspicions, which were muffled by Ciel. But even now, Javier did not believe in the duke's love. Although he acknowledged the girl's sincerity, the ruler declared that the lady could not have betrayed him, as she had a truly loving face. The guy was prepared for the fact that only one cunning swindler would win the emperor's trust. So Javier declared that the duke had charmed this girl and was now taking advantage of her. He also considered the unlikely possibility that Dionyl had fallen in love with Marlene. However, the emperor remembered how calculating the duke remained throughout his life. Suddenly, the duke confessed that he did not hate love, but hated himself. It hurt Javier to hear such words from the assistant he was trying to help. Villatan feared that Miramonte might still be trying to secretly harm him. Javier did not believe the words of the young man, who said that he had never felt this way towards the ruler. He was very angry because he believed that he was constantly, inadvertently causing pain to his beloved assistant. In contrast to the emperor, Dionyl remained calm and unperturbed, as he always was during their meetings. This only made Villeton more and more angry, and he began to shout louder at the obedient duke. As a result, Miramonte could not stand it, and reminded the ruler that he was not like his brother. These words struck the man who had been using manipulation without him noticing like thunder. And Dionel wasn't worried about the heir to his family line, since he had an adopted child in mind. Javier tried to calm down when he realized that he would not be able to elicit strong emotions from the duke. He admitted in a trembling voice that he was very afraid of losing such a good protector. However, Miramonte was unable to forget all the pain that the ruler had caused his family. At this point, the lady was desperately trying to make sense of Madame Keller's instructions on manners. It was difficult for the girl to choose the right bow, because she did not know whether the crown prince was standing in front of her. This question came as a surprise to the boy, since everyone in the empire knew how to distinguish between him and his brother. So he couldn't contain his emotions and burst out laughing, which only made the confused thief even more worried. It seemed to the heroine that this high-born aristocrat was clearly not himself, since he reacted to her like that. Then, a guy named Actor explained that it was the first time he had ever met someone who had confused him with the crown prince. In response, the scammer admitted that she had recently arrived in the area from a small town, which was why she had made a mistake. Imagine the lady's surprise when it turned out that the guy somehow knew her ally Valoni. Miss pretended that she had only heard about this woman, so as not to accidentally compromise herself. Seal had no idea how she was supposed to communicate with a real prince, so she was cautious. And the guy reminded him that the lady never told him why she was crying alone in the imperial garden. Just in case, the girl said with a smile that it was impolite to ask about a lady's personal life. This struck the prince so strongly, and no one contradicted him, that he remained silent with his mouth slightly open. Suddenly, the actor felt an incredible interest inside himself towards this lady who was not afraid of him. So he lost his temper and grabbed the girl's hands tightly so that she could not refuse to answer the questions. The swindler was frightened by the sharp pain in the places that the prince had grabbed so tightly with his fingers. She saw signs of real madness on the actor's face, and she could not understand what had happened to him. But at that moment, a familiar hand shielded her from communicating with the high-born guy who had lost his temper. The duke found a fictitious wife in time and protected her from the hands of a prince he did not like. Dionel didn't even bow politely to Actor, since he had no respect for the emperor's son. The fair-haired boy flinched in confusion as he suddenly came to his senses. He upsetly asked for forgiveness from the girl whom he accidentally hurt with his actions. The heroine spent her first day interacting with aristocrats, but she was frightened by these strange descendants of the imperial family. Miramonte guessed that the swindler had been stressed after meeting the impolite prince. However, Roland did not confess her feelings to the duke, since Actor was still nearby. For a moment, the fair-haired boy silently watched the interaction between the lady and the duke. However, he could not stand it and demanded to know what kind of relationship there was between these people. This visibly surprised Miramonte, who had thought that it had nothing to do with the prince. However, the guy arrogantly declared that Marlene was his future wife. For some reason, this information made the guy extremely angry, which was evident on his face. However, he did not show his bad side and said goodbye to the lady kindly. The actor hoped until the very end that not everything had been decided for him in this couple. The boy and girl looked at the mysterious son of the emperor with bewildered eyes. Only now did Ciel remember that Dionel had never greeted the heir to the throne. In response, the duke grumbled that they had had a bad relationship with each other for a long time. The swindler felt guilty, so she tried to talk to the duke a little. But the atmosphere around him demanded that the girl not ask any questions, so the thief felt awkward about going against her friend's wishes. Therefore, the heroine silently followed Miramonte, whom she could barely keep up with. They walked for so long that the lady already regretted several times that she had not dared to speak. As a result, the duke stopped only when he arrived at his own estate in the evening. Roland sadly asked what would happen to the boy's carriage that remained near the emperor. In response, Dionel calmly explained that the coachman would definitely bring her a little later. The guy himself was not at all worried about the thing left on the palace grounds, but the lady believed that someone like her could very well steal the expensive carriage. Then the lady demanded money from the gentleman so that she could return the cart herself. Miramonte asked the girl not to engage in such nonsense, despite her desire. However, Dionel had long since learned that it was better not to argue with this lady on such matters, and Roland's face lit up with joy when she received several gold coins. Miss didn't even really say goodbye to the aristocrat, as she was in such a hurry to get back. This fussiness of his new acquaintance brought a sudden smile to Miramonte's face. Meanwhile, the heroine regretted that she had gone for a carriage for such a small sum. All because, for some reason, Prince Actor himself greeted the girl with a smile near the cart. The miss was unhappy that the guy was personally waiting for the messenger at the carriage for some reason, and the emperor's son noted that such an order should not have been given to the future duchess. But Roland wanted more than anything to escape from the annoying rich guy. But the prince was not going to let go of the lady he was interested in so easily, so he happily announced that, for the safety of the miss, he would accompany her to the estate. The actor believed that his new acquaintance would be only too happy to have such an unexpected accompaniment. But the swindler barely restrained herself from revealing her true origins with rude words. The heroine was quite tired, but for the sake of this man, she agreed to walk. But throughout the entire journey, she did not experience as much joy as the aristocrat. But Ciel couldn't take her eyes off the night city, illuminated by the light of lanterns. Miss considered this sight truly beautiful, because she had never seen anything like it before. The prince himself had seen his capital in such a beautiful state more than once, as he walked around at night. Since the actor did not bother the girl in any way, she even relaxed in his presence. The emperor's son tried his best to show Miss all the beauty of his hometown. But he had a selfish interest, because the heir liked this lady. The heroine at first pretended not to hear the unexpected compliment from the prince. The guy noticed the girl's embarrassment and smiled contentedly, as he wanted to impress her. So, actor easily repeated the words about Marlene being much more beautiful than the city. The emperor's son would like to take this girl for himself, if only he had the power. But the lady was not at all happy that some man fell in love with her. The prince knew deep down that the lady would not love him for kidnapping her. The heroine stared at the guy with disgust as she guessed what he was thinking. She carefully reminded him that she already had a loved one and would not want to change anything. Then, the heir pretended that he was just joking, although it was clear from his expression that he was doing something else. And the girl was not ready to laugh along with the guy who almost kidnapped her. She could see in the young man's eyes how much he really wanted to have her. And because of the prince's abnormality, the heroine felt increasingly uneasy in his company. She didn't believe that she was so beautiful that she could drive the young man crazy with her appearance. However, the guy stubbornly showed more and more attention and interest to the lady with every second. As a result, Ciel experienced a lot of unpleasant feelings towards this prince. She felt cold even when the miss broke up with the guy who pierced her with a look full of lust. In the swindler's hometown, no man dared to look at a stranger's woman like that. But most of all, Roland was tired of the endless number of steps in the duke's estate. She was surprised to find that the carpet was so soft that she could sleep on it, but the duke's unexpected appearance interrupted the girl's pleasures. Ciel indignantly reminded the impolite guy that she had walked a lot, but the only thing that interested Dionel was the mention of the creepy prince. The swindler loudly declared that the actor was waiting for her right next to the abandoned carriage. However, the only thing that bothered Miramonte was that the miss continued to lie on the floor. He understood that such a short lady would have a hard time with physical exercise, so Dionel picked up Ciel and carried her in his arms to the room prepared for the girl. The swindler attempted to protest, but the duke did not even listen to her. Here the lady noticed that one of the estate's maids was walking forward along the corridor towards them. Maremont was impressed by the words that a guy cannot carry a girl he loves so much, so he picked Roland up properly, who smiled contentedly at the change in position. As a result, the assistant did not suspect anything about the gentleman she met, and Ciel noticed with a laugh that the duke quickly changed his position depending on the situation. She was pleased that she had performed well in front of the emperor, winning his trust, and now it was up to Dionel, who was not so good at winning people over. Suddenly, the heroine realized that the guy accidentally smiled at her words, which surprised the lady. However, as soon as the girl fell onto the bed, she instantly fell asleep from fatigue. Meanwhile, the maid informed the duke that there were marks of beatings on the mistress's body. The guy reacted calmly to this news, although he was worried about what happened. For some reason, he remembered his mother, who rarely communicated with her son since childhood. Nevertheless, the boy always obediently reached out to the woman, as he was glad of her rare love. But all his loved ones were dead, so Dionel considered such memories empty. He didn't know why the fraudster had once been punished, but he was worried about it. The next morning, when the heroine opened her eyes, she did not immediately understand where she was. The girl didn't expect to fall asleep in bed, but for some reason wake up in a warm bathroom. But the maid calmly explained to the mistress that she had to take a shower every day. Like a wet cat, The lady flew out of the bathroom in fear, not wanting to wash herself any further. She wasn't prepared for someone to make her so dependent on hygiene in the morning. What Miss wanted most now was to just lie down and go back to sleep, as she hadn't gotten enough sleep. But the assistant asked in surprise whether the lady would not have breakfast with the Duke. This made it clear to Roland that she had no right to refuse without arousing suspicion. However, in the end, the heroine fell asleep right at the table, completely forgetting about food. The Duke saved the girl by sending away the servants, so no one saw her shame at that moment. No matter how loudly he called the thief, she only twitched slightly in her sleep. Ciel didn't even open her eyes, as she was too deeply asleep for that. So Miramonte couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the swindler falling asleep while eating. He himself did not expect such emotions from himself, because after the death of his family, he could not relax. Only when the gentleman had finished breakfast did he confidently wake up the beauty sleeping at the table. Roland immediately jumped up from her seat in fright and lied that she had eaten well at breakfast. The Duke sighed with displeasure in response and asked the lady to go to bed if she was so tired. But Miss had managed to get enough sleep at the table, so she wanted to go for a walk in the city. The girl was surprised when Miramonte easily let her go for a walk this time. The thing was that the lady had no acquaintances in this city, so the guy wasn't worried. However, he could not let his future wife go alone, as she did not know the local streets. Therefore, the Duke sternly declared that he would send the attentive Fernando along with the lady. This once again did not please the swindler, who valued freedom above all else. But the knight had nowhere to go, because he had received a direct order from Lord Maremont. The guy quickly explained that he would only be responsible for the safety of the young lady. He knew very well how difficult it was for the Duke to find time for himself due to his business. But Ciel wasn't interested in such details, even though she had to live with Dionel. The future Duchess looked around the city with interest, trying to find any hooligans in it. However, the knight was confident that the capital had no dark side, thanks to the Duke. The heroine responded to the guy with a smile, so as not to spoil the relationship, but remained of her opinion. She was sure that in any city there were both rich and poor areas. The lady looked around carefully and almost immediately noticed the poor boy on the street. The baby was dressed in dirty clothes, and there were no coins in his cap due to the greed of people. Ciel herself lived among such people, so she could not ignore the boy. So she took the boy with her and bought him a few loaves of bread to feed him. The child bowed politely to the lady and promised that he would never forget her kindness. But the girl did not calm down at this, as she wanted the boy to eat in front of her. She gave him a bottle of milk and promised that she would buy bread for the child's family as well. Ciel did not spare the Duke's money for such circumstances, since she considered them important. The lady was pleased to see that she had made life easier for at least one homeless child. At the end, the girl gave the boy a few silver coins so that he would cover his daily quota. She knew how to survive on the streets without any problems, so she whispered some advice to the boy. The most important thing was that the child had to swallow some of the coins so as not to give them back. Roland asked the boy to come to the Duke's estate if he started to go hungry again. The kid was incredibly grateful to the girl, although he didn't understand how she knew so much. But the swindler didn't tell the boy anything, since it was too early. She kept a close eye on the baby who was about to return home. Miss knew very well how difficult life was on the street when there was no money. So the heroine could not pass by such children who reminded her of herself in childhood. But the knight couldn't understand why Marlene didn't just give the boy a few coins. So Miss told me that they give all the money they earn to the people who look after them. It was a revelation to Fernando that the child had to be fed if he wanted to help. The guy himself was surprised that the girl knew a lot about the lives of street children. But the thief cleverly pretended that the knight was stupid because he did not understand such things. She admitted that this city was indeed much better than hers, as it had beauty. The heroine was happy to walk along a few more streets to explore everything. Suddenly, she noticed a figure in the distance that she would prefer not to get involved with. This made the girl turn sharply in the opposite direction, so as not to be noticed. The knight did not understand what had happened to the lady, as she did not have time to explain. Suddenly, Prince Actor, who was walking through the city streets, appeared right behind the lady. The thief turned to him with a heavy sigh, regretting that she had not managed to run away. She would have preferred not to see this strange guy who could not be rude to her. But the prince deliberately sought a meeting with the girl he liked at first sight. The heroine had no idea how the prince was able to find her in such a large and crowded city. But the knight happily introduced himself to his majesty, whose character he did not know. The lady could only hope that the prince would not act up in Fernando's company. But with his very first question, Actor puzzled his assistant saying he didn't know the answer. While the boy was distracted, the prince decisively and quickly hit him in the face with his fist. Seal watched in complete shock as her protector fell unconscious to the ground. The swindler rushed towards her assistant in horror, not understanding what the prince was allowing himself to do. The lady screamed in panic that the actor had just beaten up the duke's own bodyguard. But the heir was only worried about the miss having dinner with him. The girl did not have enough strength to refuse the man who demonstrated his skills. Therefore, no matter how worried the thief was about Fernando, she had to go after the prince. All Marlene's words about how she had just had dinner did not bother the actor at all. Then the scammer came up with the idea of resorting to manipulation and making the guy feel ashamed. But the prince was so delighted with the upcoming dinner that he did not listen to the girl's words. So, with bitterness, Miss admitted that this madman did not care about her feelings. The heroine hoped that Fernando would come to his senses and save her from the clutches of this prince. Until then, the girl silently resisted any actions of the mad heir. It was only in the restaurant that the guy noticed that all this time he had been hurting the girl with his actions. He apologized for not being able to control his power well enough since he was a child. The thief really wanted to speak out to the prince, but she was patient so that he wouldn't make things even worse for her. Instead, the lady did her best to pretend that she was interested in talking to the guy. She was worried what Dionel would think when he found out she was missing while out on a walk in town. But actor didn't care about the opinion of Miramonte, who had long been his rival. He would like Marlene to pay attention only to him and not to the Duke. So the guy ordered the lady to eat the food that he ordered at the restaurant, especially for her. Once again, the heroine sighed heavily, because the actor was not listening to her at all. She fell silent, offended for a moment, but even this did not bother the heir in the least. The prince wanted the girl to behave naturally in his company and enjoy food, but the heroine couldn't even swallow a bite in the company of this strange and frightening man. She lied that she had already eaten such food, and the guy immediately swept everything prepared from the table. So Ciel froze at the table in horror, with a pasted-on smile, not daring to move. Even the poor waiters who simply took orders from the aristocrats got it. So the heroine, with a trembling voice, began to lie that she loved everything madly. She couldn't get rid of the thought that the guy would accidentally hurt her. The girl's state did not escape the attention of the prince, who immediately felt uncomfortable. He once again sheepishly admitted that he had poor control over his strength and emotions. So the lady even felt sorry for such an unlucky guy who didn't understand himself. Ciel relaxed a little, causing actor to watch her with pleasure. But Miss still couldn't calmly accept compliments from the prince. Roland prayed that the heir would finally let her down at the Duke's estate. However, the guy had other desires, because he began asking the lady about the meeting with Dionel. The heroine was prepared for the question, so under the actor's cold gaze, she shared the information. This story made the guy noticeably gloomier, because he would have liked to be in Miramonte's place. The guy could hardly contain his rage when the conversation turned to the hated Dionel. He forgot himself so much that he clenched his fist tightly and didn't even notice this gesture. The heroine stared in fear at the prince, who was again out of his mind and did not react to anything. For some time the young man trembled all over, trying to cope with his anger on his own. However, after a few minutes, the prince smiled cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. This made the lady feel completely uneasy, and she wanted to leave for the estate as soon as possible. And the heir admitted that he did not think that the Duke could truly love someone. This surprised Miss, although she herself saw how cold Miramonte was in life. But then the girl saw that the actor's palm was damaged due to his recent actions. She was genuinely worried by the fact that the guy had clenched his fingers until they bled, thereby harming himself. But the heir himself was wounded so often that he did not attach any importance to such things. But Roland was used to the fact that even such small wounds should be given attention. In response, the young man sadly said that the lady had a kind heart to react like that. This made the guy even sadder that this miss belonged to another person. So he honestly admitted that he had been crazy about the girl since their very first meeting. The actor sincerely did not understand what to do with his feelings for the almost married lady. The swindler could see in the young man's eyes that he was telling her the truth, as he was head over heels in love. But the girl had no intention of encouraging such feelings, which she didn't need at all. So she pulled her hand away, which noticeably upset the prince, who had expected something else. Suddenly, at that moment, a stranger's hand blocked the young man's path to his beloved aristocrat. It was the Duke, who was only now able to find the two dining in the restaurant. The heroine was surprised that Dionel came for her personally, since she knew how busy he was. Miramonte himself was not very keen on entering into open conflict with his long-standing rival. However, he could not so easily forgive the impudent guy for the fact that he violated the terms. The actor took full advantage of his status when he applied for dinner with the girl. But the lady had already made a contract with the Duke and had no intention of breaking it for this reason. So Miss was only glad when Dionel took her away under the pretext that they would get married. Miramonte seriously asked the prince to stop stealing his beloved at any time. For the first time, Roland felt as protected and pleasant as she did this time. But for the actor, it wasn't all over yet, because the couple was still not married. So the guy thought he had the right to try to steal the lady from his rival. But he completely forgot to ask about the wish of the heroine, who was only afraid of him. Even the Duke called the prince by his name sharply and demanded that he behave decently. The guy reminded that he had sworn allegiance to the emperor and not to his impudent and self-confident sons. These words made the actor's blood boil with rage, which was visible on his face. However, the prince did not take hasty action, as he decided to wait for his moment. The heroine turned anxiously to the guy, as she suspected that he would not calm down at this point. The actor looked sad and sorrowful due to the loneliness that suddenly washed over him. But as soon as he noticed the miss's gaze, the young man immediately smiled cheerfully at her. Drops of blood from the guy's palm flew towards the girl, causing her to flinch in fear. The first thing Ciel asked the Duke was how he knew where she was with the prince, and the Duke calmly explained that on his territory, he could easily find a girl with a guy. The scammer noticed that Dionel was talking to her calmly, although she thought he would be angry. Then, Miramonte admitted that actor had inherited incredible grip strength, which frightened Miss. The heroine immediately thought of a tribe of giants from the beginning of the empire, which was also strong. The thief had no doubt that the prince was related to these strong men. She irritably showed the bruise that the strong young man had managed to give her. Miramonte was not surprised that the prince accidentally injured the girl's fragile and delicate hand. But for the heroine, it was almost a tragedy, because she was about to go out into the world. The Duke doubted that the aristocrats would mistake Marlene for a dangerous bandit because of the bruise. However, he began to carefully run his fingers over the entire damaged area. The swindler shuddered nervously, as even such touches were painful to her. The girl was completely unable to bear pain, so she did not hold back her screams. But the result was worth it, as Dionel managed to completely hide the bruise. True, the guy warned that he simply made it invisible, so it would still hurt. In passing, Miramonte asked if there were any other bruises on the girl's body. He turned away in displeasure when Miss answered negatively, because he knew the truth about her. But the heroine did not notice this, and began to praise the Duke for his courage in front of the prince. Ciel was impressed that Miramonte was able to stand up to the emperor's son so easily. Then suddenly, Dionel turned to his fictitious wife and informed her that she really was fearless. The Duke's sincere smile discouraged the lady, who considered him insensitive and cold-blooded. Moreover, Miss was pleased with the compliments from Miramonte, who praised her for her courage. But Dionel thought it was normal to avoid a prince who had poor control of his emotions, so he asked Marlene to be more careful when communicating with him next time. At the estate, the heroine was horrified by the sight of Fernando, who was recovering on his bed. The guy's condition turned out to be much worse than the girl could have imagined at the very beginning. But the knight was only concerned with forgiving the lady, whom he could not save from the prince. He even vowed to atone for his guilt with his left hand. But Roland didn't need anything like that at all. So the miss abruptly knocked the knife out of the knight's hand in the hope that he would calm down. The future duchess angrily explained to the knight that she would not tolerate such actions on his part. In fact, the guy was counting on exactly this kind of reaction from the lady, so he felt better. Then Miss asked why Fernando was in such bad condition after the blow to the nose. The whole point was that the guy received a harsh punishment from Dionel for a mistake. As soon as he regained consciousness, he ran to Miramonte with a message about the kidnapping. The gentleman was not happy that his assistant had once again broken all his rules. Just a few days ago, he promised that he would severely punish the knight for any mistake. So the assistant pretended that everything was fine with him, although this was not the case at all. But he could not directly tell the girl that he had been punished for his mistakes before the Duke. The next morning, the heroine faced the task of getting ready for the upcoming ball. The lady didn't care which dress to choose, so she pointed to the first one she came across. But this was not enough, because the girl had to change clothes several times. One of the maids even allowed herself to be rude to the mistress who came from the south. The fraudster immediately felt the blatant mockery directed at her by her assistant. The lady guessed that the maid treated her this way because she herself was born in the city. and Roland was not going to tolerate such treatment, even from a young and stupid girl. To begin with, the thief smiled sweetly at the impudent girl, so that she would feel superior. But the maid suddenly realized that in front of her was a future duchess, who could not be treated rudely. Other assistants came to the aid of their friend and informed her that Lady Lanfranchi would be at the ball. But before, Ciel had never heard of this girl, who was famous in many circles. The maids shared with the mistress the information that the madam was very beautiful. One of them even personally saw how Lanfranchi showed affection for the Duke. But the lady's plans did not include competing with one of the girls in love with Dionel. She would have preferred a quieter life, but she still had to try on dresses. For some reason, most of them were too big for the heroine, who did not consider herself thin. Meanwhile, out of embarrassment, Miss put her socks under her chest to make it look bigger, and in this form, Ciel appeared before the maids, which genuinely made them laugh with such behavior. Only the assistant who showed disrespect to the mistress stood silently aside. Suddenly, she fell to the floor with a loud noise, which no one expected from her, because everything was fine. She cried loudly and declared that she could not look at the skinny lady who was going to become the Duke's bride. Roland calmly met this hysteria, although she did not at all understand why her assistant reacted so sharply. The maids reacted immediately and promised that they would deal with this girl themselves. As a result, Miss managed to prepare so well that the kind and caring maids were delighted. The heroine herself was pleased with her appearance, as she had never dressed up in such outfits before. But Roland remembered that this shell would fall apart as soon as she changed into something simple. The lady was a little sad that only Marlene Sinclair, the role she played for everyone, was shining. So she believed that only Miramonte, who had been an aristocrat since childhood, would always sparkle in life. Dionel looked stunning in any outfit, as he was known for his beauty from birth. However, he complimented the girl, who seemed like a real beauty to him at that moment. The heroine broke into a grateful smile, as she was pleased to hear such a thing from the Duke. Therefore, the lady tried not to be discouraged, despite the fact that in many ways she was inferior to aristocrats from birth. So Miss was not aware that the imperial ball usually lasts 3 days, as everyone was accustomed to. While the girl was lost in her thoughts, in front of the carriage, Dionel noticed something about her again. Roland hoped until the very end that her little theft would go unnoticed by Miramonte this time. However, this did not happen, so the guy suddenly approached the thief, who could not overcome her instincts. The miss looked with fear at the young man, who was going to take back what was stolen at any cost. It was clear from the Duke's face that it was useless to negotiate with him this time for the sake of forgiveness. As a result, the guy took the girl's socks, although he couldn't understand why she needed them at all. This made him unable to restrain himself, and he began to laugh as they rode in the carriage to the Emperor's palace. For the first time in his life, the Duke laughed so joyfully that Miss could not even be offended by him. Roland noted with confusion that Dionel had not been so cheerful and freely expressive of emotions before. In the end, through laughter, Miramonte allowed the swindler to take the socks, since she needed them so much. Meanwhile, assistants at the palace were already waiting for the gentlemen who were supposed to arrive for the event. The boy and girl appeared majestically in the main hall, maintaining a calm expression on their faces. The aristocrats immediately began to whisper about what a beautiful and elegant couple the two of them made. The swindler was in her element, and was even now thinking about a profitable deal. So she asked what the Duke would do if one of the aristocrats at the ball decided to fight with her. But Miramonte didn't have time to answer, as one of the guests approached him to greet him. It turned out to be the Marquise of Durand, who immediately recognized the Duke's companion, as they had met before. It was a real revelation for the man that this girl was actually an aristocrat. It took a lot of moral strength for the heroine to pretend that she was glad to see Uncle Hugo. But the lady quickly created a good impression on the Marquise, who at first doubted her identity, and Miss Dionela quietly whispered that this man, by coincidence, was her victim of fraud. Several years ago, she deliberately pretended to die in order to get a bag of coins. It's true that Marlene went overboard with her lies, so the Marquise thought she had died. So the girl tenderly declared that she was healed, thanks to the power of her love for Miramonte. Miss told Uncle Hugo a sweet story about how, without Dionel, she really would have died soon. The aristocrat was so taken in by the latest lie that he didn't even think to doubt his friend's words. He supported the lady, whose love, according to legend, was so strong that it even saved her from a fatal illness. As soon as Durand left, Miramonte's expression changed, as he was dissatisfied with the girl's behavior. But they didn't manage to stay alone for long, as another acquaintance approached the guy. It was that same Lady Lanfranchi who madly and unrequitedly loved the best swordsman of the empire. The heroine immediately remembered what this girl was like. According to the talkative maids, Dionel immediately introduced his future wife to his friend in order to avoid further misunderstandings. But the red-haired madam still angrily declared that it was she who should have become the Duke's bride. This behavior came as an unpleasant surprise to the fraudster, who wanted to avoid conflict. The Duke also did not want to attract attention, so he suggested that the lady talk elsewhere. He couldn't talk in front of Marlene, so he asked her to wait at a distance. But the thief had a completely different plan for the situation, because she was extremely curious. So the heroine heard Lanfranchi talking about a connection in the form of some child. But Miramonte was sure that the baby could not become the reason for marriage between them. He sternly informed that the child did not need anything, as he was growing up in one of the estates. The lady had no idea that the Duke would accuse her of trying to take advantage of the baby. From such fragmentary phrases, the swindler could not understand what they meant. But suddenly, Dionel began to defend his future wife, with whom he wanted to spend time. The miss noticed that the guy was in an awkward situation, so she ran up to him with a smile. She happily invited her future husband to dance to this beautiful music. Miramonte didn't think that the thief would suddenly come to his aid in such a situation, and Ciel took the initiative completely into her own hands and said goodbye to the unpleasant lady. As a result, Lanfranchi had no choice but to stand silently by. Before the red-haired madame could begin to get indignant, the heroine ran away with the Duke. During the dance, the girl couldn't resist asking the guy if he liked this rescue. The thief was extremely pleased with herself, as she believed that she had arrived just in time. But Dionel still had a hard time understanding the motives of the lady who had made the contract with him. As a result, the guy couldn't help but smile at the sight of Marlene's persistent efforts. He was not at all offended by the miss, although he reminded her that he had asked her to wait near the banquet. And the heroine noticed that Dionel was good even at dancing, although he devoted a lot of time to wars. The girl became genuinely interested in whether there was something the Duke couldn't do. But the guy suddenly stopped smiling when the scammer asked him about it with a smile. Roland had learned to understand Miramonte's emotions, so she guessed that he would not answer her. And at that moment, the lady became frightened by the loud and unexpected announcement of the Emperor's arrival. Javier walked down the stairs into the hall with dignity, taking in everyone present. The first thing he noticed was a dancing couple of lovers standing nearby, and the heroine could hardly restrain herself from asking the ruler to keep a better eye on his son. Of course, Villeton couldn't help but talk about the marriage of his best swordsman in the empire. He was worried that the guy and girl might break up right after marriage, which made them shudder. But Roland knew how to insist on her own way, so she turned on her acting with conviction. Javier was afraid to bring the lady to tears, so he did not say that he did not believe in Dionel's love. However, he hinted that he had no doubt whatsoever about the girl's boundless love. This made the swindler realize that she needed to try a little harder for the Duke. Suddenly, the Emperor said that he could not interfere with the couple, as it would be shameless. These were his last words before leaving, like a wedding blessing. The heroine asked Miramonte with hope whether they had really received the consent they so desired. For her, this meant that she would soon receive the desired reward in the form of earnings. Suddenly, the stomach of the newly minted aristocrat betrayed a plaintive trill. The Duke reacted calmly to this and sent the lady into the garden where the food was located. Marlene promised not to get lost and hurried to the set table outside. Everything around looked incredibly appetizing, so the miss could hardly hold back her drool. The girl quickly began to look for a plate to enjoy the offered delicacies. And then someone's male hand thoughtfully offered the heroine the plate she was looking for. But the miss was not happy at the sight of the omnipresent prince, who found her so easily again. Although the lady assumed that she would not be able to avoid meeting the guy who lived in the palace, the swindler used all her charms to prevent the actor from accidentally falling into another madness. Meanwhile, she was trying to find an excuse to return to the hall to the people. During their conversation, the lady announced that she wanted to dance, so she turned away. But the prince suddenly grabbed the girl by the hand and asked why she was avoiding him. However, the thief, frightened, began to deny the fact that she tried to communicate with him less. This made the guy a little happy, as he wanted to get closer to a beautiful girl. So he tried to figure out until the very end why the lady was so afraid of him after their meeting. He leaned close and said that he did not wish to cause any harm to the aristocrat, after which the crazy guy pulled the lady along with him, as he wanted to show her something. The actor didn't even listen to the lady's arguments that Duke Dionel was waiting for her in the hall. so the heroine got into another trouble, which she tried so hard to avoid. What irritated her most was that this impudent aristocrat dragged people along with him, so she decided to teach him a lesson and kicked him in the chest with all her might. With just one movement of his hand, the young man easily stopped the swindler's weak attack. This further upset Marlene, who had hoped to at least hit the target. To avoid any objections, the prince threw the girl over his shoulder, intending to carry her further. This angered Roland so much that she began to scream, forgetting her manners. But no matter how much the lady struggled, trying to escape from the strong grip, it was all useless. And only the girl's shoe, which fell near the table, made it clear that something had happened to her. As a result, the guy carried the lady deeper until it became completely dark outside. Seal was tired of resisting, as all her attempts went unnoticed by the stubborn prince. Only now did Miss notice that she had lost her shoe somewhere and could not walk on her own, so she had to resign herself to the fact that Actor would continue to carry her in his arms. Only a few minutes later, the guy, with a satisfied smile, lowered the girl to the ground. Her mouth dropped open in surprise at the sight of the incredibly beautiful tree in the center of the clearing. Before, the heroine had never encountered the divine trees that were guarded by the emperor. The heroine guessed that there were many beautiful legends about this particular tree. She couldn't argue with the arrogant prince that it was truly a beautiful sight. The guy could see from the aristocrat's face that she liked the tree, and this made him happy. The lady guessed that the emperor's son was glad to share with her something precious to him, so she offered some restrained praise to this out-of-control adult child. Only now did the lady think about why she was afraid of this strange guy in the first place. The girl was pleased that the prince had come all this way just to show her beauty. He admitted that he was in such a hurry that he forgot to explain his plan to Miss. Rising to his feet, Actor suddenly reported that the lady was like this tree, after which he explained in more detail that from the very beginning, she reminded him of a local spirit. But Miss believed that at that age, it was time to stop believing in ghosts. The emperor's son understood that the Miss would not be able to believe his words, so he awakened the tree. A strong wind immediately blew across the entire clearing, which frightened the swindler a little. And immediately after that, a beautiful girl with closed eyes appeared in the middle of the tree. In complete shock, the heroine asked the prince who this mysterious beauty in the tree was. The actor explained that it was their family spirit, protecting the emperor's family. He admitted that this lady's eyes were open as a child, but something went wrong. The guy assumed that the aristocrat was somehow connected with the spirit, since she could see him. He heard stories that in ancient times Cynthia walked the earth and helped people. So in Marlene, the prince saw one of the descendants of the empire's greatest defender. But the swindler didn't believe that she could be a spirit relative. The heir said that from their first meeting, Sinclair reminded him of the beautiful Cynthia. This made the lady laugh, as the guy was obsessed with her because of the fairy. Only then did the prince ask with a smile, what would happen if the lady's blood were spilled here? The heroine did not expect such a turn of events, since she did not want to sacrifice her health at all. But the guy suddenly started laughing loudly, showing with his whole appearance that he was joking. He loved Cynthia so much that he looked for any way to bring her back to life. Only now did Miss understand where the emperor's son had so many strange thoughts from. The guy was happy that he couldn't harm the tree even with all his strength. Suddenly, at that moment, a small lost shoe flew into the prince's head. Roland stared in fear at the object that appeared out of nowhere, something she hadn't expected. It turned out that the duke had once again found his future wife and was very angry. He grumbled to the thief that she should not have been kept under surveillance because of the thefts. The prince was angry because Dionel followed them without asking. But Miramonte did not consider himself at all to blame for the unpleasant situation that had arisen. He reminded the crazy actor that he had kidnapped the duke's own future wife. The prince couldn't help but draw his sword from its sheath, pointing it straight at the boy. The thief was outraged by this behavior of the guy, who had become a little closer to her during this time, and the heir pressed the blade so hard to the duke's throat that blood began to flow. The actor loudly accused Miramonte of not having valued his life up to now. What irritated the prince most was Dionel's dead gaze, which did not change at all. It hurt him that his father was trying to persuade such a lost person to live. The actor did not want the duke to continue to humiliate the emperor in front of everyone. But Miramonte didn't think he was doing anything wrong when he didn't pretend to be happy. The prince declared that the duke could not love the lady if he did not wish to live himself. However, Dionel insisted that these were all empty and loud words from his opponent. He grabbed the swindler, pressing him to himself, which the lady met with a frightened look, and the duke declared that he had chosen this girl and was not going to give her to anyone else. Miramonte recalled that he had already suffered the prince's insolence twice and was not going to do so again. As a result, the heir was left alone in the middle of the field, and only the tree calmed him down. And the heroine soon noticed that she was left without any shoes, which made it painful to walk. But it seemed that the thoughtful guy was not at all worried about the lady's sad situation, all because he gradually moved forward and did not even pay attention to all the girl's words. No matter how hard Ciel tried to catch up with Dianel, she had trouble doing it without shoes. So in the end, Miss was left alone in the middle of the forest, as she could not walk that fast. She couldn't stand it and screamed loudly at the Duke that he was making fun of her and not saving her. At that moment, Miss noticed some suspicious rustling from the other side. She froze in place in surprise, not even making an attempt to run away. It turned out that the girl's scream was met by a real, huge, and menacing tiger. The lady could not believe her eyes, as she was in the imperial forest, so she assumed that this animal must be kind and well-trained. Miss tried to talk to the tiger, but he only let out a loud and dissatisfied roar. However, the swindler believed that the animal was simply getting to know her, and everything was fine. She gave the animal a few instructions, and he immediately stopped growling at the girl. Just as the lady was thinking that the tiger was kind, he pushed off the ground and jumped on her. The heroine would not have been able to dodge the blow, so she thought with horror that she would die like that. Suddenly, right in front of the lady, the Duke jumped out and took on the sharp fangs. The guy was terribly unhappy about what had happened, but he kept his cool for now. He only sternly ordered the stupid tiger to sit down, which frightened the beast. The lady watched in surprise as the animal obediently stopped being angry, after which, with a sad look, it slowly walked away, returning to its owner. And the Duke explained that they had come across the Emperor's pet tiger, who had gone out for a walk. But the lady was furious, because the beast clearly lacked proper training. But what scared the girl most was the blood that appeared on the guy's hand after the injury. She rushed in fear towards the guy, who didn't even pay attention to such pain. The swindler began to circle around the Duke, begging him to go to the doctor immediately. Dionel didn't expect Miss to be so insistent on him following the treatment. The thief sat her friend down on the first stone she came across and promised to provide first aid. For this, the lady needed the guy's clothes, so she asked him to undress. For the first time, Miramonte encountered a girl he couldn't refuse at such a moment. But Miss was so busy looking for a clean cloth for the bandage that she didn't notice Dionel's gaze. Meanwhile, he obediently undressed, showing the thief his strong and battered body. The heroine was horrified at the sight of the number of scars the Duke received during the war, and Miramonte again reported that the wounds were nothing to him due to his numerous injuries. However, the lady stubbornly insisted that the animal could have brought the infection into the body, so she tore her own dress, not sparing it at all, for the sake of the guy's bandage. Miss promised that the first thing she would do upon her return would be to insist on proper treatment. Dionel watched silently the angry and diligent face of the lady helping him. He admitted that he could not understand why the aristocrat reacted so violently to the wounds. Ciel pulled away in surprise when the boy reminded her that she had marks too. She immediately guessed that Miramonte was referring to bruises from old beatings in his youth. The lady had no doubt that the Duke had learned about this from his close servants. After all, while bathing, Miss was too careless, so she showed her body. However, the girl was not angry with her assistant, even though she had exceeded her duties. She said she sees her scars as a symbol of a hard life, so she's not ashamed. The guy didn't argue with his future wife, because she refused his help with treatment. As soon as they returned to the estate, the Emperor almost fainted from what had happened. He was visibly surprised when Marlene told him how the Duke had protected her. Finally, he asked Sinclair to keep a close eye on the Empire's stubborn sword. And Dionel really did look like he wasn't going to continue treating his arm. The thief watched the Duke silently and carefully, as she was worried about his condition. Only now did she understand why the prince accused the guy of lacking affection for life. After all, the scars Dionel received were signs that he did not spare himself at all. Previously, the lady thought that there were no people who did not value their lives. Even she herself, although she grew up in dirty alleys, never gave up. But Miramonte, despite all his status and wealth, seemed to have no interest in anything, when suddenly he announced to the lady that their wedding would take place the following week. The heroine was completely unprepared for such a quick event in her life. Dionel didn't see a problem with what was happening, because they were just pretending. He said that the ceremony would be very small and quiet, so few people would know about it. The lady anxiously asked how soon after the wedding the ruler would grant the title to the Duke. But the guy had no idea when this long-awaited event in his life would happen. The fraudster didn't plan to stay in the capital for more than a year, so this was important to her. She rudely reminded Dionel that she did, in fact, have a brother and her own life. The guy could only promise that Javier wouldn't keep him in the dark for long. This calmed the heroine a little, who had become upset about the uncertain future. Miss remembered that she would have to disappear quietly as soon as Miramonte had the title, and the Duke didn't see any problem with this, because there were many ways to kill Marlene. But the girl felt uncomfortable betraying Dionel, even if it wasn't real. All Miramonte wanted was to pass on his title to the child under his guardianship. No matter how interested the swindler was, she didn't dare ask questions about the baby. But the lady understood that the emperor might suspect something was wrong if he hurried. However, Dionel was not worried about this, because the ruler could no longer take away the title. Miss guessed that the Duke was not at all concerned about Javier's possible feelings. But when all these events happened, the thief planned to be in her hometown. She was going to devote all her free time to Mel, whom she was not seeing at the moment. The lady was a little sad to have to say goodbye to the Duke, but that was the deal. So the scammer didn't talk to the guy about serious topics about the future anymore. Although the wedding was not real, the girl could not help but worry about its occurrence. For Miramonte, all their agreements so far have remained just a contractual marriage. But the lady was very nervous in front of Dionel, which distracted him from his work. In the end, the guy got completely angry and threw the emotional thief out the door. This did not greatly offend Roland, who was simply sharing her feelings with Dionel. Instead, she went about her business, occasionally interacting with the maids. The girl remembered that a boy from the street was supposed to come today, and she grabbed some bread for him. The image of the Duke's sad and cruel face still lingered in the heroine's head. However, she reminded herself that once the contract ended, none of this would concern her. Here the miss noticed a small pebble that was thrown at the strong glass of the estate. As soon as she looked out, she saw her good and long-awaited friend. Without a moment's hesitation, Miss grabbed the curtains and slid down them. A boy named Jean was always surprised by the variety of skills of his older acquaintance. The thief responded with a confident face and lied that she had been taught acrobatics as a child. Jean didn't delay for long and immediately got down to business, which he was supposed to deliver to the girl. It turned out to be a letter from Mel, which was quite difficult for Ciel herself to deliver. The heroine immersed herself in reading news from her brother, whom she had not seen for a long time. He said that at first, boys actually tried to bully him at the academy. However, the guy did not let himself be offended, since he had learned the skills much better than them. Mel grumbled, hoping that his sister would have good health and work. Roland was pleased to read news from a boy who had grown up so quickly. She thanked little Jean for such invaluable help with the letter. Of course, the lady brought payment with her, since she was not giving tasks to the kid for nothing. The miss also learned how well the boy had been living on the streets lately. She advised the child to hold out until he was 15, because then life would become easier. The heroine did not reveal how she knew so much, but she gave a lot of advice. Jean pretended that he didn't need such prompts, but in fact he listened attentively. As soon as Roland saw the boy off, she began to wonder when she would receive another letter. Suddenly, with her trained eye, the girl noticed something bright in the grass. She stepped on the thing to avoid losing it and found a gold coin in front of her. This made the thief incredibly happy, as she could not give up her instincts. A short distance later, the lady noticed another coin, which she was glad about. She couldn't get enough of the fact that there was so much money lying around in the garden, and so the miss gradually approached the farthest bushes on the estate grounds. However, the girl was happy with everything, since she never refused to earn money. Suddenly, right out of the bushes, an actor appeared, who had specially set up such a trap. Only now did the heroine realize how stupid she had been to fall for the trick. Marlene asked with displeasure what the prince was doing on the Duke's territory without permission. She realized that he was an uninvited guest, so she was about to shout about it loudly. But the bag of gold coins that appeared in front of her face made the lady change her mind. The actor laughed at the fact that rumors about the girl's love for money turned out to be true. He learned about this from an old friend, Valoni, which made the heroine very angry with her. However, the lady could not take her eyes off the bag of money, which she truly loved. The guy said that he would give all this money if the aristocrat fulfilled his request. He hoped that the lady would not be able to refuse him, as she would be attracted by the coins. But Ciel was smart enough to disagree with such an idea, which was clearly dubious. However, the prince came here with the firm intention of getting the girl's consent. Seeing his crazy look, Miss asked what clothes he had brought. The actor cheerfully declared that Marlene would definitely like the outfit, and pulled out an archaic dress. At the sight of him, the heroine once again realized how crazy the prince was.